Today we'll see how we can use different UI elements or user interface elements in Unity to create a start menu. So let's get going. Go to the Scenes folder and create a new scene. Let's call it Menu and rename our current scene Game. Let's open the newly created menu scene. The first thing we need to do in this new scene is add the same skybox we're using in our game. So let's go to the Environment tab of our lighting window and add the FS002_night_moonlit skybox. Now our start menu is gonna have 4 UI elements. A text logo, just for show, a start button that's gonna let the user transition into the game if he or she clicks it, an exit button that quits the game if clicked, and finally 2 lines of text at the bottom that tell the user their best scores. So let's design this menu piece by piece. First, we must add a canvas game object to our scene. Go to Game Object from the menu bar, then under UI, select Canvas, and here is our canvas. A canvas is just an invisible panel that we can pin different UI elements on, like texts, images, and buttons. You can also see that Unity has automatically added an event system game object. I don't think that we're going to be tinkering with it, so let's just leave it as is. Now the first thing we're going to do is add a panel game object to our canvas. So right click on the canvas game object, and then from UI, select panel. And let's name it Logo Panel. This panel will help us in placing our text logo on the canvas. Now if we select the Rect tool from up here, we can see that a blue target sign has now appeared in the center of our panel, as well as 4 blue circles on each of the panel's corners. The target sign is what allows us to move the panel around the canvas if we drag it around. And the blue circles allow us to stretch or shrink the panel around the canvas. So let's pull up the panel so that it covers up a quarter of the canvas height. And let's stretch it across so that it covers the entire canvas width. So now the area that the panel occupies on the canvas is going to be the designated area for our text logo. But before we go ahead and add our text logo, we want to make sure that our panel game object is always going to have this size and position on the canvas across all screen sizes. Let me show you how this can be a problem if we don't account for it. If we change the screen size in our game window to a typical Full HD screen, then you can see that our panel has moved from where we originally placed it. To fix this problem, we need to fix our panel to the top center of our canvas by anchoring it, as Unity calls it, to that region of the canvas so that it stays there at all time. And the way to do that is by going to the inspector window for our panel game object and then select the Anchor Presets menu from its Rect Transform component. Here are all the different regions of the canvas that we can anchor our panel on. Hold the Shift key down or the Option key if you're using a Mac like me to change the pivot point of our panel game object on the canvas, and then select the top center region of the canvas. And now our panel is anchored to the top center region of our canvas. And by the way, the Rect Transform component is what controls the position, scale, and rotation of the different UI game objects on the canvas. It's similar to the regular transform component that we used to in 3D game objects. So now if we change the screen size in our game window to a 1920 by 1080, we can see that our panel is staying in the same place. However, it's not scaling up with the increased screen size. And so let's go to the inspector window of the canvas game object, and under canvas scale, change the UI scale mode to scale with screen size. And we'll choose a reference resolution of 1920 by 1080, just because it's common in mobile phones displays. It looks like we might have to readjust our panel size on the canvas. So now if we change the screen size of the game window, not only does the position of the panel remain still, but also its size scales with the increased screen size. And here is a different screen size, and a third one. So we can see that our panel occupies the same portion of our canvas regardless of the screen size. And this change, by the way, is applied to all children game objects under this canvas game object. So we only need to do it once. Now it's time to place our text logo inside the canvas region covered by the panel. So let's turn off the background image of the panel because we want it to be transparent so that our text logo can be visible. And then right click on the Logo Panel game object from the hierarchy and add a Text Mesh Pro game object from the UI menu. If this is your first time adding Text Mesh Pro, as I'm sure that it is, then Unity will prompt you to import it as a package. So hit Import Text Mesh Pro Essentials. Once that's done, hit Import Text Mesh Pro Examples and Extras. Then close the prompt. Let's rename our newly added text game object to Logo and go to its Anchor Presets menu. Hold down the Shift or Option key and select the Stretch in All Directions preset. This preset stretches our text in all directions against its parent rectangle, which is the panel logo, so that it remains confined in its area and doesn't overflow outside the panel area. And now in the text input field of our text game object, we'll write something like TempleRun Unity, and then center it horizontally and put it in the middle vertically. You can see that our text understands center as being the center of the panel, not the entire canvas. This is because we made the children of the panel game object and then stretched it against its rectangular area. Now let's make our text bold and then italicized and change its size to an outrageous 180 points. Also, we want to change the font style. I've included a nice selection of fonts that we can use in your TempleRun clone starter kit package. So let's go to the fonts folder and drag the archaeological caps font onto the font asset field of our logo text. And now our logo text has a new style that I personally think looks much cooler than the default option. Also, notice that because our text does not entirely fit the horizontal space of our panel, it's overflowing in a new line and not outside the canvas, which is what we want. We've done the right settings and left the rest for Unity, so that we don't have to manually adjust every detail. So now let's reduce the font size to say 140 points, so that our logo remains on a single line. And let's add a color gradient to our logo text, so that it can really stun the user and draw him to the game. Tick the color gradient option under the main setting of our logo text game object. This setting allows us to color each corner of every character in this text input field with a different color, effectively creating a color gradient for our text. I'm gonna match the colors of the top two corners and also match the colors of the bottom two corners. Now just take a look at our logo text. It looks sharp and stunning. It also has character. Let's see it in the game. Maximize on play, hit play. Here is our logo, welcoming the user. And we made it using simple text, nothing too complicated. Let's exit play mode. Now it's time to add the play and exit buttons below our logo. So right click on the canvas game object from the hierarchy and add a button UI game object. Let's name it Start Button. You can see that Unity has automatically added a text game object as children of the parent button game object, and it's stretched out against the button game object, which is the proper setting. Now let's select the Start Button game object and then select the Rect tool from up here and change the size of the button on the canvas. This looks decent. Let's make sure that we anchor it to the center of the canvas while holding down the Shift or Option key, and we want to turn off its image component so that our text can appear. Now this entire area of the canvas is technically our button, so if the user clicks anywhere on this rectangular area, not just the text, it will trigger some event. In our case, it's gonna be loading the game scene. Now let's rename the text game object under the Start button to Start Text, just so that we can keep everything straight. We'll also go to its text component and change its color to white from the color option, and then change its font size to 120 points. This looks good, maybe a little too big, but it should be alright. Let's display the word Start so that the user can know that this is the Start button. The final thing we'll do to the Start button is change the style of its text. Personally, I'll choose this stylized crazy snowtop caps font. So let's drop it onto the font field of our Start Text game object. Really cool. Now let's create an exit button by duplicating the Start Button game object from the hierarchy and then dragging it down using the Move tool until it has no overlapping borders with the Start button on the canvas. Let's change its name to Exit Button and then change the name of its text game object to Exit Text. Finally, let's go to the text input field of the Exit Text game object and display the word Exit. Now if we click on the Start Button game object, we can see that it has an event under its button component called onClick. This onClick event happens when the user clicks on the Start button. And so what we need to do now is have this onClick event call a function from a script that we have not yet created that's gonna load the game scene. So let's go to the scripts folder and create a new script that we shall call SceneMan, which is short for manager. Now let's attach the script to the main camera game object in the menu scene because it must be attached to some game object in the Unity editor for it to be called from the onClick event in the Start button. Mind you, this is an entirely different main camera game object from the one in the game scene. Please do not confuse the two. Game objects in different scenes in Unity have no relations to each other, even if they share the same name. Okay. Let's open up the SceneMan script in Visual Studio. First, let's delete the update function because we're not gonna need it in the script. And then let's create a new public void function that we're gonna call toGame. And we're making it public because it's gonna get invoked from the Unity editor. So inside this function, we'll call the Scene Manager class, and then we wanna use its load scene method, followed by a pair of parentheses and a pair of quotation marks. You can see that Visual Studio is showing us an error. And if we hover over the red line, it says, the name Scene Manager does not exist in the current context. This is because the Scene Manager class is defined within the scope of the namespace Unity Engine.SceneManager. So we can either type this namespace followed by a dot before it, like so. You can see that the error has now disappeared. Or we can just delete this and go up here and tell Visual Studio that we're using the namespace Unity Engine.SceneManager just once. This is why every script in Unity starts by declaring these three statements, because they include all the code definitions that make Unity works. I told you in the beginning of this series that we'll learn by doing. I doubt that you'll ever forget what namespaces are used for in C# now. Okay, let's go back to developing our code. Inside the pair of quotation marks in the load scene method, we must supply it with the name of the scene that we want it to load, which is game. Okay, let's create another public void function that we're gonna call exitGame. This function is gonna shut down the game if called. So type application.quit, a pair of parentheses, and terminate with a semicolon. Okay, save the changes to the script and go back to the editor. Select the start button game object and then add a new action to the onClick event by clicking the plus sign. Make sure that you've got the runtime only selected and then drag the main camera game object onto it like so. From the SceneMan component of our main camera game object, invoke the toGame function, and now we'll do a similar process for the exit button. Select the exit button game object and add a new action to its onClick event. Drag the main camera game object onto it. Invoke the exitGame function from the SceneMan script component. Save the changes and hit play. And now if we click on the exit button, then nothing happens. This is because we're still inside the Unity editor. Once we build our game for mobile phones, it will for sure take the user out of the game. And if we click the start button, oh wait, it's telling us that we must build the two scenes from the build settings. So go to File from the menu bar and then choose Build Settings. Click Add Open Scene and then drag the game scene from the scenes folder onto it like so. Save the changes and hit play again. And now if we click on the start button, our game loads, which is super nice. Now the last thing we'll do in this menu scene is display the user's best running distance and coin collecting scores at the bottom of the screen, so that he or she can have an idea about their previous best scores before they start the game. So let's add a panel game object to the canvas, and let's name it Coin Score Panel. And then use the rect tool to allocate some canvas real estate to our text that can display the scores to the user. This looks good. Now we want to display our scores on the bottom center of the canvas. So let's anchor the panel on the bottom center of the canvas by selecting this anchor preset while holding down the Shift or Option keys. Now let's add a regular text game object to our panel and name it Max Coin Score Text. Let's change its color to white and center it horizontally and vertically inside the panel. Let's write a placeholder of a text here in the text input field so that we can figure out the proper font size. It's actually gonna get changed from inside the SceneMan script. So let's type max coin score, space. And then we wanna add a 5-digit number, like 10,000, just so that we could see how it's gonna be displayed once we change it using the SceneMan script. Let's also increase the font size to 20 points and change its style to San Francisco Fedora Titles. Pause. The reason our text is not fitting the panel area properly, hence the new line, is because I forgot to stretch it against its parent rectangle, which is the Coin Score Panel game object. So you could either do that fix yourself or do what I'm about to do. Continue. Let's change the horizontal overflow option of our text to overflow. And now our text can continue on a single line. Let's turn off the image component of the Coin Score Panel game object because we do want to see it. And now we want to duplicate the Coin Score Panel game object so that we can create the best distance run score UI text. Let's elevate it above the Coin Score Panel game object using the Move tool. Let's rename the new panel to Distance Score Panel and rename its children text game object to Max Distance Score Text. Finally, change the display text to Best Distance Run, space. Let's see how our menu looks now in the actual game. Hit play. This looks good. Now I wanna add an image of a coin right after this 10,000 number, just because I think it will make our menu much prettier. So right click on the Coin Score Panel game object, and then add a UI image game object. Next, go to the Models folder and drag the gold coin image onto the source image field of the image component of our UI image. Let's change its size to 20 by 20, and then rename it in the hierarchy to gold coin. I think we have a very organized game object hierarchy, don't you think? It really makes the process of developing much easier. Now we wanna anchor the gold coin UI image right of the Coin Score Panel game object by selecting this preset while still holding down the Shift or Option key. And let's use the Move tool to bring it closer to the 5-digit number. Let's hit play. Nice. Don't tell me that this small ad didn't make a huge difference in our menu. Now the only step left is to change the text input of these two game objects from inside the scene man script so that they can constantly display the updated user's best scores. So let's go to the scene man script and do that. Let's create a public text variable that we will call best distance score. We'll use this variable to store an instance of the max distance score text game object so that we could adjust its values here in the script. Likewise, we'll create another public text variable called max coins text, which we will use to grab a reference to the max coin score text game object from the script. And the definitions for the text variable type is included in the Unity Engine.UI namespace. Now the error has vanished. Let's save the changes and go back to the editor. Select the main camera game object, and here we can see our public variable visible in the inspector window. Let's drag the max distance score text game object onto the best distance text field, like so. The same goes for the max coin score text game object, which will be dragged onto the max coins text field of the scene man script. Let's save the changes and return to the scene man script in Visual Studio. Inside the start function, type best distance text, and again this variable is an instance of the max distance score text game object, so you can use it to update its text input field by typing .text after it. And now we'll set it equal to the following string text: best running distance score, colon, and then we'll overload the plus operator and retrieve the user's best running score from the player prefs using the high score big D key. And finally, we'll specify that the distance is in meters. Notice that we were able to obtain the value of the user's best running score without the need to reference it from any other script like the player controller script. This is because this value is stored in our hard drive and hence can be accessed from anywhere using this key that we have specified in the previous tutorial. Okay, now we'll do a similar thing in a new line for the max coin text variable. We want to update the text of the max coin score text game object so that it reads max.coins collected, space. Then retrieve the value of the best coins collected score from the player prefs using the high score big C key. Now let's save the changes to our script and go back to the editor to see them. Play. And here are our UI text from the scene man script with the updated user scores. You can see that whatever initial text was there got replaced with the values we've inputted in the scene man script. Now comes the end of this tutorial. It was a lengthy tutorial for sure, but I feel like we've learned a lot of important things. In the next tutorial, we'll continue our work on the game UI. In particular, we'll design a UI for displaying the user's scores as he's running in the game. Thank you.